You know, I love the Lincoln Project and I follow you on social media. And I just think your insights are so important for people.
Your task will not be an easy one. Your enemy is well trained, well equipped, and battle hardened.
There is not a liberal America and a conservative America. There is the United States of America.
Good night and good luck.
Hey, folks, I'm Rick Wilson, and welcome back to the Lincoln Project podcast. Our guest today is Steven Hassan. Steven is the expert on cults and has written one of the definitive books, which is about to be re-released for the moment we're in. It is called The Cult of Trump. A leading cult expert explains how the president uses mind control. Steven, welcome back to the Lincoln Project. I am so grateful you're here with us today. For folks who are not familiar with your background, first off, let's launch right into that. Tell us and tell the audience your background and your perspective on cults and how Donald Trump fits into the expertise that you've developed over a lifetime.
Yeah, thanks, Rick, so much. You know, all I can say is when I was 19 years old and a college student at Queens College, and I should say I grew up 1.3 miles from Donald Trump's childhood home in Flushing, Queens, New York. So I've known Donald Trump my whole life. But for me, I got deceptively recruited after my girlfriend dumped me into a front group of the Moonies. And became right-wing radicalized to the point where I was sitting in leadership meetings with Sun Myung Moon, and he was saying that democracy is satanic. God wants us to take over the government and install a theocracy. All the things we're hearing now from the Christian nationalist extremists and New Apostolic Reformation has been a slow burn for 50 years. And I'm sitting here as a former cult member who experienced it firsthand. I'm not speaking down to people who are in the cult of Trump. I'm saying, hey, look at the big picture. And it was learning about Chinese communist brainwashing that helped me start to reality test. Wait a minute, we're God, but they're Satan, but we're doing the same 8 criteria of Robert Lifton for brainwashing. This does not compute. And it was only when I started the next day, when I read one of Moon's speeches to congressmen and senators, where he was saying how much he loves America and respects Americans and how surprised he is that Americans could actually believe he's brainwashing youth. I was with him over 100 times in person when he was talking how stupid Americans are and how satanic we are. And so, but it was, the point I'm trying to make is that it was the first time in 2.5 years I actually had a critical thought. I said, he's a liar. And as soon as I said to myself, he's a liar, it was like a switch got turned on. That means he can't be a man of God. It means he's not trustworthy. What have I been doing for 2.5 years? It was just like somebody opening a Venetian blinds in a dark room when it was midday. And it was like, oh my God, what have I been believing?
You know, you mentioned Robert Lifton, and I have the old, I don't know, 63 or 61 copy of Thought Control or Thought Reform.
61. I have it on my bookshelf.
It's
right
it's
above
upstairs
my head.
it's upstairs on my selection of psychological warfare books and advertising books. But I remember reading it as a young man and being struck by the efficacy of it has been deployed through cults. And again, as you mentioned, this came out of like Chinese indoctrination theory, and this book, folks, was about these interviews with American POWs from the Korean War and Chinese political prisoners, and they all had this through line of how a cult made its members put themselves behind the power of the cult and the leader of the cult, and it was a fascinating story that is we still see it today. And Trump's cult has all those characteristics today of the classic, methods of cult indoctrination and brainwashing. It goes through all of it almost step by step. Do you think he understands the actual method he's using, or is it more instinctive?
Well, let me just comment that Robert Lifton's book was published in 1961. He was an Air Force psychiatrist.
Yep.
Margaret Singer was an Army psychologist. Edgar Schein was an Army psychologist. Lewis, Jolly, and West. They were all experts in military intelligence trying to figure out what were the communists doing to brainwash. What is this thing called brainwashing? So it really is it's something that came from the Cold War. This was not like a few people saying, let's figure out what brainwashing is. This is the real thing. And it was central to my understanding. And Lifton, when I met with him a few months after my deprogramming, he's like, what you're describing is so much more sophisticated. This was 1976 when I met Lifton. He said, you got to study psychology and update us on what's going on. So to answer your question, does Trump know what he's doing? I believe that he's an asset of Russia, based on Yuri Shvets's testimony as a former KGB official who came to the U.S. after the Soviet Union fell. And based on all of his behaviors, it makes a lot of sense how Russian oligarchs were helping him out of his casino bankruptcies and his real estate things. So I think he's getting instructions, and I don't think he understands it because he's not a literate man, but he certainly came from the pickup artist school of thought of let's learn hypnosis to get into women's pants or their dresses, so to speak. And I know that he learned from Tony Robbins neuro-linguistic programming. So at least I put that in the book as well. And it was really when he was debating the other GOP nominees that I was like, oh, he knows NLP. Because I was watching and listening to his methodology, and it's like, no, this is not something that organically just happened.
Explain to folks what NLP is, because Trump does use it.
Yes. So, and it's something that I was trained in 1980, 81. When I got out of the Moonies and studied social psychology, there was something missing. And when I was exposed to Ericksonian hypnosis, Milton Erickson, who was actually part of MK Ultra consultations when the CIA was trying to understand mind control, Erickson came up with a process-oriented way of tracking people and influencing them unconsciously without their awareness. And these two men, Bandler and Grinder, came up with an organization and a model called NLP, or Neuro-Linguistic Programming, to teach people the techniques that the psychiatrist was using for healthy purposes to help people get better. And I got disenchanted with it when I realized NLP is amoral. It depends completely on the ethics of who's practicing it. If you're a therapist caring about your client, it can be very helpful. But if you're a salesperson or you're a cult leader, and I know cult leaders who actually were trained in NLP, like Yogi Bhajan of the 3HO cult, this is very, very destructive mind control programming.
Trump uses that on the stage where he says things like, all of you know, and more than we've ever seen, and all these emotionally linked things that he gives his people. But there is so much of it wrapped up in Trump that is skillful, and some of it is less skillful, but he has that con artist gift. But something else is beyond Trump, I think. What is it you think in our society right now, and maybe it's just social media, what is it in our society that has given him like this ability to pull off this con at this scale, where people now believe he is descended from God, that he is God's chosen representative on earth? This wildly exaggerated sense of that he is divine, that he has a divine purpose. Is it just the skill he has in building the cult, or is it something beyond that in our society you think that's more consequential?
I think it's beyond it, but let me just say, for those people who haven't read the Cult of Trump book yet, Chapter 3, I compare him with Jim Jones, Sun Myung Moon, my former cult leader, and Hubbard of Scientology. And I talk about Eric Fromm's malignant narcissism, something George Conway's is, with his anti-psychopath pack is like, the media has fallen down and not explaining this. This is a critical thing for everyone to understand the criteria and characteristics of a stereotypical cult leader. But the other thing that people need to understand is that there are actual authoritarian cults comprising the majority of the cult of Trump. And in particular, there are these groups called New Apostolic Reformation, where the leaders of each of these, and some of them are mega churches, say they're apostles or prophets who speak directly to God. And God told them Trump won the 2020 election. But these groups control behavior, information, thoughts, and emotions, and program people, just like I was programmed in the Moonies, to not allow negative thoughts because evil spirits would be invading me. These people are so programmed with irrational fears or phobias to not even question. So when the public says, how can anyone believe that Trump is being used by God? These people are following their prophet or apostle who says that Trump is being used. At the minute the prophet or apostle says Vance is being used by God, they're going to switch immediately if that winds up happening, God forbid. But the point is that there are Falun Gong is a Chinese cult group that does Epoch Times, is a mind control cult. We have The Family, that's a mind control cult. Opus Dei, there's a great book coming out by a financial journalist on Opus Dei. That's the Catholic right-wing people that Barr was involved with. He was on their board of directors.
I am very, very
trafficking
familiar with Opus
people.
Dei. Yep.
Yeah. So what I'm trying to convey, and then to finish answering your question, what's different now, because I got out in 76. So I've worked with cult members for decades before the internet became online, and everything shifted. And now with lack of privacy data for individual citizens, with algorithms, supercomputers, and social media, what we're experiencing is information psychological warfare being leveled at us through Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, Christian nationalists, and they're co-opting Americans to do it on Americans. And that's where it's devious. They got me to be a Mooney representative to convince people that Nixon needed to be president despite Watergate. I literally fasted for 3 days on the Capitol stairs, even though I hated Nixon before the Moonies.
Right.
They convinced me, God, we can't think from man's point of view. We have to think from God's point of view. And there's a bigger picture. So I know I'm speaking from experience. And if I may, one more minute, Rick, just say we have millions of former cult members in the United States and around the world. There's so much interest. There are documentaries and podcasts by former members of thousands of different mind control cults. And what I want to put the message out is share your story. Don't be ashamed. This is part of the human experience, that we can be lied to, that we can follow something that is not healthy and change our mind. And we need to make an exit ramp so people can leave the cult of Trump and not be blamed that they're idiots or morons or stupid. That's a thing I have with Michael Cohen. I said, stop calling them stupid, please. He's like, but I was stupid when I was in the cult of Trump. I said, I get it, Michael, but be nicer to yourself. You believed what you believed based on your experiences at the time, but like life has to go on.
So as you mentioned a minute ago, it's like they're in the cult. Trump has this hold over them that is just unparalleled. In part because the leaders of their religious movements, the leaders of their social movements, their leaders in their media have told them over and over again, Trump is the God. Trump is the one. Trump is the singular leader. When the actuarial tables finally catch up with Donald Trump and he shuffles off this mortal coil, and if that happened tomorrow, there's no one in my mind in the Republican side right now who has that same degree of showmanship, that ability, and the desire to con people, to do the mind control whamma jamma on people, as Trump does. Does it take a certain amount of that sort of showmanship and skill to be the cult leader, or can the process turn that person into the next cult leader, whoever would replace Trump on the scene?
Yeah, so I want to also mention, I mentioned New Apostolic Reformation. People don't know Mark Burnett, who did The Apprentice, who does The Survivor, and Shark Tank, etc. He's head of the mountain of Seven Mountain Dominionism that wants to destroy the separation of church and state. So they were grooming all the listeners to believe in Donald Trump as this mastermind, great business person, even though he went bankrupt so many times and was a total con artist. So to answer your question, I think that there will be a vacuum for a period of time, but the other people will be chosen to fill in. And when it comes to having blind faith that God is speaking through your leader, I want to remind people the Abrahamic faiths, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, they all share the Garden of Eden story, however they want to understand it, as pure metaphor or literally. But Almighty God did not brainwash Adam and Eve to be obedient and dependent. There was something in the divine plan to give choice and to follow out of faith and not out of coercion. So my message to anyone listening to this who thinks of themselves as a good Christian or a devoted Jew or Muslim, we need to use our conscience. We need to use our common sense. And when it comes to love should be stronger than fear, especially if you believe you're following God, the divine, omnipotent God. What are you afraid of? Right? So I'm trying to appeal to people to come back to values, honesty, integrity, taking care of other people. Like, as you help the least in my kingdom, you do so to me. I'm quoting Jesus, and I'm Jewish, Rick, but those words are good for me. Yeah, as you take care of the least, it's a signal of your spirituality. And putting other people down who are poor or who need a job or are homeless, this is the opposite of a love message that I think is the best of religion.
Yeah, there is a certain degree of of that intersection of the dominionism and the evangelical Christianity and the Trump of cult, or the cult of Trump, where they intersected. And I have seen a little bit of improvement, I'll call it, on that front, talking to friends of mine who are evangelicals, who were all in on Trump in 2016 because they thought Hillary Clinton was the Antichrist or something horrible. They weakened in 2020. Now it's gotten harder for them this year. And look, the majority of evangelicals are still going to be with Trump by a long stretch. But I've been talking to some of my friends who are evangelicals, and they are now, it's gone on so long and they've seen so much that there is a sense of like, okay, this guy isn't the guy. This doesn't work. This isn't working anymore. And I think that is a really interesting development because that seems to be pretty organic to me. It doesn't seem to be contrived by their leadership. There are a lot of them who are just like, I can't do this anymore.
Exactly. And this is another gripe, if I may gripe with you, Rick, about the media and a
Sure.
lot of pundits who say the cult of Trump members, no one's going to reach them. It's impossible to get them to change their mind. They're so brainwashed. It's permanent. I say nonsense. Everyone has doubts.
Sure.
I had doubts as a member of the Moonies, but they were suppressed. I needed that opportunity to open up and remember my own experiences as they were happening, that I was like, what? My conscience is bad because I want to give $1 to a homeless person,
Right.
or, like, so the what I'm trying to convey is that a lot of people, and it can be a positive contagion effect where influencers start to say, yup, I was wrong. God isn't using Trump. A lot of people can exit the cult of Trump in a very short amount of time. And from the beginning, I was saying, let's use the rule of thirds. A third will stay in, a third will come out, and a third can go either way, depending on what messaging is coming out to them. And what I'm heartened by are Christian scholars speaking out, quoting
guys
the
like
Bible,
Russell Moore,
preaching. Yes. And Matthew Taylor and Onishi and others. This is very, very important. And if I can give one more plug to a documentary that's just coming out, it's called #Untruth, The Psychology of Trumpism. George Conway opens it, but there's like a whole list of really fantastic guests, and humbly I was included. It's really, it gives the argument in a coherent way. And I think if you have a family member or friend who still is supporting Trump, with love, with respect, just say, I'd love to watch this doc with you, and get your opinion on it. We'll hit the pause button and let's discuss what the points are, because I think it can be a fantastic kind of deprogramming tool.
One of the things that somebody said to me, one of my evangelical friends said to me, he goes, what convinced me, is that Trump is not reflecting God or representing God. Trump is just using him. He's just using the word God, not that, because none of his behavior conforms with their beliefs. None of it. It's completely detached from their beliefs. And I think that's a really, that's a vital kind of question here is, just how far away is Trump from the stated values of not only of the church, but of conservatism. And while that third may stick forever, that's not a majority anymore. That doesn't work. That's not going to change the whole ball game. If a third are fully persuadable to break and a third are going to maybe stay home, that's a good day for America. I think,
but it's not going to be forever. It'll be for a while, Rick. So I catch you on that one.
No, for sure.
But seriously, the technique that I teach, and I wrote a whole book called Freedom of Mind on how to talk to your family and friends and cults. The whole technique is, what you don't do is attack the leader, the doctrine, or the policy head on, because that activates the cult identity to be defensive and feel persecuted. The technique is to talk about another group that's doing brainwashing and mind control that they would agree with.
Right.
Go through the bite model criteria and then ask them questions, how their experience is different. And what works with cult of Trumpers is Chinese communist brainwashing and pimps and traffickers, and the techniques that they use to recruit and indoctrinate people to be sex and labor slaves. People will listen to that. And so it's a psychoeducation approach, not a persuasion of facts and rationality. It's a asking questions, being patient, waiting for the person to reflect. But they'll see it if they watch a documentary on Scientology. They'll be like, that's really obviously brainwashing, or that over there, right? But as soon as they can have a case example in their mind, then you have a platform to ask respectful, curious questions. And it works. Trust me.
Oh no! I listen. You are the guy who understands how to make this happen. I think sometimes, though, it does. Sometimes there can be an externality that shocks people, and it's narrow in the case of the Trump world. But there are a lot of people in the January 6th cohort who stormed the Capitol, thinking that was what the leader wanted them to do, and are now waking up in prison every day, going,
"Well, it was what he wanted them to do."
Oh yeah, but they're waking up in prison, going, "I did what? Wait, what?" There's a lot of, but I think those externalities are fairly rare and bespoke. You don't really get a lot of those cases because a lot of people can sort of switch on and off their Trump adulation. You know, they don't have to feel like they're living it every second. Once you're in jail, though, you're in jail.
Well, for me, the most clear way to explain brainwashing is it's a dissociative disorder. Mm-hmm. I'm using psychology because I'm a mental health professional. But think about the real Steve Hassan, who is a Jew who liked girls and wanted to write poetry, and then the Mooney Steve Hassan, who was a right-wing fascist who wanted to take over the world and run his own country one day. The real Steve was still there, but the cult Steve had him like malware takes over your operating system.
Right.
It got taken over until I had that near fatal van crash away from the group for 2 weeks. Met with my sister. My father cried and begged me to hear another side. And it wasn't because I had conscious doubts. It was because I wanted to prove to my family I wasn't brainwashed and I wasn't in a cult, that I agreed to talk to the ex-Moonies. And that's where they showed me Lifton. And we went through the 8 criteria. And it's like, yeah, we do that. We do milieu control. We have loaded language. We have doctrine of confession. We have dispensing of so every single one was like, that's weird because we're God, meaning the Moonies, and communism is Satan, but we're doing the same Chinese brainwashing techniques. It still wasn't enough to get me out of the mindset, but man, it put a big wedge in there to loosen me for that realization that Moon's a liar. How could he be a man of God if he's a liar? And we have 35,000 documented cases of Trump lying.
It is
at least
the lying is. It's interesting because the lying, there's a rationalization mechanism with a lot of Republicans where they say, "Oh, that's just Trump's show. That's just Trump, playing the role of Trump. That's Trump. That's how he is." But there is a certain degree where people, if you say to them, would you do that in your life? Could you stay in your job if you lied 35,000 times? Could you keep the respect of your coworkers or your friends or your neighbors if all you did was lie every day? And I think the lies have been something that's been
the question.
A slow burn on Trump, a slow corrosive burn on Trump.
That's one of the critical questions. You just enunciated it, Rick. It's like, tell me honestly, when you own a business, would you hire someone who you would lie to you all the time? How long would you keep them employed? Would you marry someone who is a pathological liar? When people think about that, they're like, of course not. And it's like, okay, and then we can agree. People who lie are not trustworthy. So let's now apply this to what's happening with Donald Trump. And then if they say it's a show, I go, really? How is it different? Please explain that one to me.
Right.
Please convince me. And they can't because it doesn't work.
I come from the old world in some ways of campaigns being about ideological and policy persuasion. I can't wait till we can get back to a world that looks a lot more like that and a lot less like a national cult that is right now being fed. I think one of the cult through lines in the past is, the dear leader is always the martyr. He's always the one. And with the assassination attempt on Trump in Pennsylvania and this concept of an assassination attempt in Florida, it strikes me that that's going to be a hook they really lean into. And they've tried to politicize it, even though both of these people are kind of like quite obviously not driven by conscious political motivations, but by a lot of psychological demons. I say that as an amateur, of course, but is the martyr aspect of this, talk to us about how that plays a role in solidifying the leader's power in a cult.
So we'll go back to NLP, which is a form of covert hypnosis that we were discussing, that Erickson developed, and then NLP and Trump learned it. What I want to share with people is an understanding that if you can capture someone's attention and misdirect it, and this is one of his major techniques, is to take what he's doing and project it on others and blame them for what he's doing. It's attention manipulation.
Sure.
And that's one of the key techniques that you have to be able to, when you're listening to media, go, is there substance here, or is this attention deviation or manipulation? The other thing I want people to understand is that human beings aren't rational. We're emotional and we rationalize.
Right.
But that what's happening is emotional manipulation. And when we're emotionally aroused through fear, disgust, negative emotions, it takes our frontal cortex offline because it's activating, the amygdala, survival, fight, flight,
100%.
freeze response, instead of stepping back, taking a breath and thinking and using our whole mind to go, what's going on here? But what I've learned is that when I can explain my influence continuum and bite model, it gives people a handy dandy, easy framework to go, oh, this is ethical influence, this is unethical influence. And it cuts through all the noise and the chaos, which is the foundation. If you want to brainwash people, and this goes back to Kurt Lewin and Edgar Schein, if you want to brainwash people, you have to confuse them, overload them, disorient their sense of self to ready them for indoctrination of the beliefs that you want them to have. And so what I say to people is, it's your mind, you should control it. And because it's a dissociative disorder coming to us through our cell phones and digital media, we need to be in our bodies, and we need to have time away from the media to sleep 7 to 9 hours, where chronically sleep deprived Americans are, to be in nature, to be with our animals, our children, like things that make us human. Like we're not digital beings, and real friends who hug us and say, I care about you. That's where it's at, not strangers who give you numbers of how many followers do you have, because they may be bots anyway. But the bottom line is we're pretty cool. Like, we've done a lot of bad stuff, but being alive is a wonderful gift, and we should not squander it. And we should not want to allow anyone to take away our freedoms like they are in China or Russia. It's just, and if you think about the whole arms and assault rifle stuff, do you think people can own assault rifles in Russia if you're a private citizen? You would be put in jail if they found a bullet in your car, a single bullet. You cannot. But they had Maria Butina infiltrating the NRA saying, yeah, we need more assault rifles, because they want us to kill each other. That's what they want. They want an actual physical civil law. And one last thing, Rick, if I may, my former cult, the leader died, but his two sons, one has a gun cult called the Rod of Iron Ministries.org. He has a crown of AR-15 golden bullets and talks about taking over the America and changing the Constitution. And his brother has an arms factory making assault rifles. And they have 2 training compounds, one in Tennessee and one in Waco, Texas, training people for civil war. Now, how they're allowed to do this in this climate, I don't understand, but maybe someone listening to this will be like, we got to shut this thing down. Because Sean Moon was at January 6th saying it was Antifa, and the Moonies newspaper, the Washington Times, was saying it was Antifa. And sorry.
It is a very determined. That's a very determined move. It sounds like the Moonies have kept it all as a family business. So
it's astounding to me that the Moonies paid Donald Trump $2.5 million to endorse them a few weeks after January 6th. And when I talk to people about my former cult, they're like, the Moonies, you never hear about them anymore. They're still big players internationally. Don't count them out. In fact, one last thing I'll add is that I learned that the Moonies have been the Center for Climate Science Denial for 50 years.
Why am I not surprised?
According to David Lipsky, who wrote a book called The Parrot and the Igloo. So using the Washington Times as a propaganda mechanism is a big piece of the cult that I was in. I got out 48 years ago, but they're still players to this moment.
Wow. Well, folks, there is no shame in getting out of a cult, whether it's political, religious, or any other derivation or deviation. So I want to thank Steven Hassan for coming on today. Steven has a great book, folks. If you have not read it, you really should. It's called The Cult of Trump. A revised edition is coming out soon. It is already the revised edition out on Kindle and audiobook. I really recommend it. Forward by our good friend George Conway. Steven Hassan, do you have any social media people should follow you on?
Yeah, I'm on all the major platforms at Cult Expert on X, on Instagram. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on even TikTok. As much as I don't like TikTok, my social media people are like, people love you on TikTok. They love the bite model. You have to be on it. I'm like, But anyway, yes, freedom of mind. I have a Substack. So thanks for all of that. I appreciate it.
Great. Thank you so much for coming today on the Lincoln Project podcast.
Thanks for all your great work.
Thank you, my friend.
Good night and good luck.